Gary, I first want to talk about like what are some of the development practices you used 30, 40 years ago when it comes specifically to pinball?
You mean to develop, to design games, what have you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm not a game designer, nor was my father.
Mm-hmm.
And historically, the history is that my father started as a game operator. You probably read this or saw this. A game operator in the 30s, became a game distributor, and then when I was 2, he flew from Philadelphia to Chicago and met with Harry Williams, his supplier, Williams Pinball Company, and kidding around, he put his feet up on Harry's desk and said, "Why don't you sell me the company?" So Harry went up in his airplane, flew around for 3 hours, came down and sold Sam half of the company. The point being, Harry was the designer, the creator of the games, and Sam came in and he was a sales guy. Ultimately, the company bought Harry out, and Sam, but we always worked with Harry. Thereafter we left. I started working for him when I was 16 in the summers in the stockroom. Later, I went to accounting and then law school, and then I came back to Williams. But ultimately, we left in '84. Started 76. My, how time flies.
Right.
Yeah. And we had Stern Electronics. I did. He died in '84. We started this company in '86. But the point that I was going to get to is back in, when Sam started out with Harry, this was the 40s, and games were electromechanical. So Harry would explain that you could come up with a concept. He could draw the playfield, draw the game. He could design the circuit using relays and step-up units, and he could make the prototype, in the model shop, and he could wire it and so forth. And he could do everything. In '76, we switched to solid-state games. They were more complex. We no longer had relays and step-up units, and Harry couldn't do the electronics anymore because he needed software, and the games became more complex. And today, if you look at what we have with an LCD screen, it's like a video game on the screen, and a staff of inside our accounting, our product development group, headed by George Gomez, George is probably the only guy in our business that has an actual degree in design. So any event, there's 50 people inside and a bunch of people outside. So it's a much more complex product now, and more complex. Back in the day, in the 70s, we didn't have modes. In your game design, you had make the A, B, C, D, and you'll light a target, and you make that, and you get special or something. It's all much simpler. So now it's very specialized.
Specifically, how have the business practices changed over the last 50 years from your perspective?
Oh, well, we were in the game operating business, shall we say. We didn't operate, but we made games for game operators. We still do, out-of-home entertainment. Excuse me. But now we have, we export 40% of the games, but we have 3 market segments. We have operators, which really, you're appealing. The operator has to make money, but you're ultimately appealing to the player. And with the advent of FECs and bar arcades and whatever, we're appealing to a lot of millennial players, shall we say. But another segment is collectors and enthusiasts, or first general homeowners segment, and then another segment, collectors and enthusiasts. And what happens is that there's sort of a cycle here going on. There's a definite cycle, and that is that where less than half of our games are probably for out-of-home entertainment. During the height of the pandemic, we had the upside in our business, I had always said, was the rec room buyer, the home buyer. And during the height of the pandemic, boy, that took off. And although our out-of-home entertainment buyer, the operator, slowed up, that took off. So we had for some time collectors and enthusiasts. There's some growth in that, and that's encouraging. But of the three segments, we recognize that an upside would be in the home or the rec room buyer. Today, the upside is in the game operator, because he's coming back online, and people tell me that income collection play is 120 to 150% more than it was in pre-COVID. So people are trying to get out, and they're getting entertained with our games and having a good time. So I go back to these three segments, the operator or location player, the rec room buyer, and the enthusiast. And we see that the location player, millennial often, not always, millennial often, a little past millennial, maybe a lot past in my case, but and when he's 40, 45 years old, maybe younger, maybe older, says, gee, I'd like to have a pinball machine for the home. So that guy or lady who's out in the location today is our next home buyer in 20, 30 years from now or less. And that home buyer gets a game, and he may get a second game, a third game, because he may get the bug, say he wants more, and he become a collector or an enthusiast. So therefore, the location player may become a rec room owner, a game owner, may become an enthusiast collector. And a lot of those people now have too many games. They don't know what to do with them. So they turn around and they go to a location and say, can I put some of my games in your location? The new operators of games in our business are often pinball enthusiasts. It's a full cycle, and they start this whole cycle again. Now, one size doesn't fit all, so we make Pro, Premium, and LE. We also make a pure home game, the pin. The channel may be a little different. Our distributors, our commercial distributors, full line distributors that sell mostly to operators, mostly, there's a little crossover. Whereas we have retail dealers who are retailers who sell to homes and enthusiasts. Now, often the distributor isn't set up, doesn't want to. His real business is commercial. He does FECs, fitting out, and so forth. But he still sells some to a general homeowner. And likewise, that retailer has been selling the homeowner who became an enthusiast, who now that enthusiast who's buying from that dealer becomes an operator. So there's a crossover. But the point is, one size doesn't fit all, three different market segments, and a cycle that grows it.
Now, are there any business, specifically, again, speaking to business development practices that you miss from 40 years ago that you used to do that you don't do anymore?
Not really, except that we do all licensed games now. So that's a difference. And when you decide to do a licensed game, that we do rock and roll, we do Lucas, we do Marvel, we
Right.
do some TV shows, once in a while a product like a Harley, not very often. I'd love to do a sport, but I can't find an international sport.
Yeah,
no,
it's tough. It's very, very, very regimented.
We tried it. We tried after the 92, the Barcelona Olympics. I thought, okay, basketball is going to be international, but it wasn't. Football, there's two different footballs. There's the international, the broad, big football, and there's American football. They don't cross. Baseball is America's Cuba, which we don't have much of a market in, and Japan. But try and sell a baseball game in France. It's not practical. So even when we did NASCAR, we arted it and changed it a little to be Grand Prix for Europe, because NASCAR doesn't go in Europe. And if you look at Formula One racing here, which is they had a kart, which was that type of open wheel racing here, and didn't make it here. So I'd love to find international sport. So all licensed, which means that you have to get, we used to design a game, and then Gottlieb was famous for this. They design a game and then they say, okay, it's got a 5-target bank. What is a word with 5 letters, and we'll make that the name of the game. They would name it later. It didn't matter. Now we've got modes and stories. We tell stories and what have you in the game. So we have actual game theory, much more so. And so and with a licensed title, you got to get into the story. So we need a design team whose creative juices will flow over that title. Otherwise, they're not going. You can't tell somebody it's our new product introduction cycle, our development cycle is 14 months. And again, much more different things being done between video, between solid state. The art is more complex. We used to, like I showed you there, this is and you can barely see, but then the stencil side of Laser War, our first game. And now we have, digital printing, playfield digitally printed, and everything much more complex. So you have to have a design team who are into that title, can get into that title, and want their creative juices to flow from it. It will allow the creative juices, have creative juices for it.
What are some trends over the past 40 years that you remember being big steps forward in the industry? And that could be in terms of development, distribution, marketing, customer engagement, or anything like that comes to mind.
Well, customer engagement, I'm going to go to first, and then we're going to come back to some trends, design trends. We have the Stern Army, where we have launch parties. We have players engaged in events that we didn't have before. We have the IFPA, the International Pinball, easy for me to say, International Pinball Flipper Association. They ought to rename that so I could say it easier. With 100,000 players in 30 countries. Well, 10 years ago, it barely existed. And so we have competitive pinball. More leagues, there's something going on every weekend and every day, actually, with pinball. Our Stern Army in particular is there was 200 or so Army members right now, growing, and it this street team. It organizes events in locations, which is where we want the games for these kind of events, not necessarily in somebody's basement, but in a commercial establishment, because this is a social game and where people get together. So that's been very, very important. So again, more activity, more things on our part. New game, we have launch parties. That part is quite a bit different. Used to be a man in his game. Now it's people. In more organized play. As to development, if you look, there are a couple major developments that happened in a medium period of time. I mean, we all know that all of us pinball people know that in 1948, Gottlieb added, I go earlier. Electricity was added in the 30s, changed things. I'm not that much of a historian, and I wasn't born until 45. So I did have one of those games in my office once. Batteries, then electricity and so forth, and that gave a lot more mechanical action, because it's mechanical action pinball. In the more modern times, in the mid-70s, we changed from electromechanical logic, relays and step-up units, to solid state to microprocessor based. And this was quite an advance, and microprocessors were very sophisticated. In fact, we weren't supposed to send games to China at that time because microprocessors were secrecy. So I hear. Other developments that happened is about 8 years later. Well, that had one of the things that interesting, solid state, we made the same game electromechanically in solid state. Same rule set, same sounds were the same. We had chimes in the mechanical and chimes in the solid state. We weren't doing solid state sounds at that point. Okay? So that was the same. The only thing that was different was that instead of drum units, score units, we had a gas discharge display that had the score. And when the player saw the game, the only thing he could tell, they played the same. They had the same rules. We weren't doing more sophisticated rules, even though we could. We didn't know that yet. And the operators weren't used to solid state. They really wanted mechanical games because they could fix those easily. They knew what to do. Yet the solid state games made a lot more money. And so where it was planned to make mostly electromechanical relay step-up unit games, it went the other way. It went solid state. Raymond Loewy was a designer who designed the Studebaker in 1953. It's a car. You guys are too young to remember it. But they had this two-door, very low, sporty-looking two-door sedan, and later became the Studebaker Hawk. And the marketing people said, well, of course, we'll make 25% that low car because people want 4 doors, and we have a bigger version of it that will be very cool. People will be very happy with it as a 4-door. It's not so advanced looking. Of course, the sales were the other way. 75% the 2-door and 25% the modern looking 2-door and 25% the 4-door. Basically, it was style, and the same is true with solid state. Technology, yes, but it was introduced. It was a style change. Later, we had Space Shuttle, ramps, Williams game, ramps were added. Style change, a style of game design. It changed it. We had a dot matrix display. We started it on Checkpoint, so we were the first ones to have a dot matrix display. That made all the other games look obsolete, look old. Now we have a display, a score display that does some animation on it, an LCD. So this made everything else. You have dot matrix games today with 13 shades of orange or 13 shades of red. Even the color ones with the color accessories, they look old and they don't look modern. We went to LEDs, and LEDs are much more reliable than incandescent light bulbs. Some people originally didn't want LEDs because they liked, it doesn't have that ugly yellow color of the light bulb. But the result was that young people saw something modern. New players saw something modern, and it's much more attractive. And of course, you've seen games tricked out with all kinds of colors, LEDs. And we now, of course, use a lot of tricolor LEDs and have banks that have GIs that are different colors. So a lot of just the look, the whole modern look. And the latest thing is that we now have a bus system, which is a scalable system, PCB. Instead of 2 big boards like this, we got a little board like this. Instead of a cable as big as my wrist, we have a computer cable going down through the machine to semi-smart boards, and it's scalable, lets us do more things, lets us add more. It lets us develop things to the future, and that's what we're doing. And if you look at a modern car, you no longer have a cable in it like this. You've got, a few wires to semi-smart boards down the way to operate the car. It's technology today. Of course, and one other thing while you're doing this, I got to point out, technology today is hard to get, hard to buy. The supply chain in the world is broken, totally broken. Our microprocessor has doubled in cost in the last month or two. Stainless steel's up 3 times. Wood is getting, besides hard to find, very expensive. Everybody's building houses all of a sudden. Cost of a 2x4 is up like 3 times. You can go to your Home Depot, whatever.
Yeah, I just
So we
fixed
have
my
some.
fence. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah,
Say
just
that again. You just did what?
I just fixed my fence in the backyard, a wood fence,
Yeah.
2x4s,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yeah.
it was, yeah, ridiculous.
Yeah. And so we're facing the same thing with the games as our other game manufacturers, but also manufacturers. Ford was closing their factories and waiting for chips. They were parking F-150 trucks in the parking lot because they couldn't complete them. Chevy was shipping games to dealers without all the printed circuit boards in them.
You know, obviously during the 90s, there was a revolution with technology. Home consoles were becoming a thing. Arcades were shutting down. I mean, like, as the transition. Why do you think your company was able to stay afloat while so many other companies kind of crashed?
Tenacious. I needed a job. No, we've been up and down a number of times. Now we're just going up. But as the industry did, pinball's, it's a basic ball and bat game. It's nothing too serious. We're not telling a serious story. We do have game theories. We are telling the story of the title, but this is not like China. My father used to say that a pinball is like a movie. It should have good theme, good action, good photography, artwork, good sound effects, good promotion, good distribution. But unlike some moves, I always use China syndrome, which you may not remember, but it was about a nuclear plant that melted down, through the U.S. to China. Didn't go that far, but we're not telling any great stories. We're just about fun. Capital F, capital U, capital N, fun. So why did we survive? We weren't a public company that was trying to find a bigger business like Williams that went in the slot machine business, that type of thing. We kept up with the trends, which Gottlieb didn't. And I can tell you things that were in their games that I don't agree with, and I think obviously time has proved that right. We've attracted the best. Now we've attracted the best people who've been designing at various companies, and so we have the best designers. Some people call us Willie West because we're west of down where Williams used to be on Roscoe. But we survive because we take it seriously. We take the game seriously. Yes, we're a business, but we also are. It's our vocation. It's our avocation. We believe in it. Car guys, design a car because they love cars and they design cars. But they want to make that car for a couple of reasons. They want somebody to use that car, and they want to make enough money to design the next car. We're in this. We try to understand what the public is looking for, whether it be the enthusiast collector, the rec room buyer, or the home or the operator. What they're looking for, and try to design a game that we like, but that goes to this mass market, so that somebody will use it and we can make money to design the next game, so that we can make something somebody else can use, and so forth down the way. Big cycle.